Exploring Personal Identity, the Narrative Self-Explained. Hello, I'm Elizabeth Camp, a philosophy professor at Rutgers University. Today, I'd like to explore narrative theories of personal identity with you. Personal identity is one of philosophy's earliest and most foundational questions. Who am I? What defines me as me? These questions are deeply engaging because they touch on practical concerns we all grapple with in our lives. However, when philosophers tackle this topic, their answers often feel frustratingly abstract. They usually treat personal identity as a specific instance of broader metaphysical inquiry, asking, what conditions determine the continuation or cessation of this entity? To answer, they rely on elaborate hypothetical scenarios. For example, imagine a woman named Alpha. Born in El Paso, she works at a pharmaceutical company, enjoys spicy food, and practices kickboxing for fun. Now, suppose her body were instantly destroyed while an exact molecular duplicate appeared on Mars. Would that replica still be Alpha? Not just someone matching her description, but truly her? Or what if all her memories and desires were swapped with the Queen of England's? Which person would then be Alpha? Another scenario. If her brain's hemispheres were transplanted into two different bodies, who would she become? These thought experiments are intriguing, but the dominant theories of personal identity, such as the idea that I am my body, or I am a chain of psychological states, struggle to provide consistent explanations for all these cases. More troublingly, these theories don't address the very questions that make us care about personal identity in the first place. The traits they propose to define me, like spatiotemporal location or psychological continuity, apply equally to Alpha, you, or even a billiard ball, or at least a rabbit. They don't explain why the differences between us matter, or why our individuality is meaningful. This is where the narrative theory of personal identity offers a fresh perspective. It starts with the idea that humans are fundamentally storytellers. Homo narrans, as scholar John Niles called us, rather than just Homo sapiens knowers. According to this view, who I am is shaped by the story I tell about myself. Or, to avoid self-deception, the story a deeply honest and reflective version of me would tell. Think about how we introduce ourselves. On first dates, at parties, or in memoirs. We share where we're from, what we've experienced, and where we're headed. When I ask, who am I? I'm really asking how to weave the events of my life into a coherent, meaningful story. Because the narrative view sees the self as built from memories, plans, and interpretations, it explains why certain traits or actions feel central to our identity, like Alpha's passion for science, while others seem incidental, like her job at a pharmaceutical company. It also captures the intuition that crafting a self is an active, ongoing process. For instance, Alpha might describe herself in her youth as from the barrio, but later in life, she might reinterpret that as just one chapter in her broader story. Being born in a certain place doesn't necessarily define a person, or have much significance in the end, as it primarily focuses on the unique characteristics of individuals and their specific roles at particular moments in life's journey. The narrative view emphasizes the intimate and intuitive connection between understanding who we are and determining the best course of action for Alpha. The action she takes now is the one that most fully actualizes the self she is in the process of becoming. This could mean returning to graduate school, starting a nonprofit, or saving up to buy a house. Only Alpha can decide, and different choices may lead her down very different paths, creating later selves with incompatible interests and values. Despite its rich explanatory power, the narrative view has been endorsed by a wide range of philosophers, psychologists, anthropologists, historians, and literary critics. However, there's a problem. The narrative view primarily explains the identity and significance of lives, not the identity and significance of individual selves. The issue is that a narrative, as Aristotle points out, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The narrative structure is teleological, focusing on the story's end and the actions that lead to it. This can lead to the meaning and value of a self being held hostage to the story's end. Many lives may end at inopportune times, either too early or dragging on after their main work is done. Intuitively, we don't want to say that these narratively uncompelling ends render the selves who live those lives less worthwhile. Someone like Alpha might have a rich, robust, morally praiseworthy self, even if she lacks a grand life story to tell. She might have always known she'd be a scientist. She might have just stumbled into close friendships and cool hobbies, helped lots of people, and have a deeply ingrained sense of spiritual peace all along. These are all qualities that make for a good self, but they might not add up to the specific beginning, middle, and end temporal structure that makes for a good story. The model of the self-made man, waging his way through the world on a quest to discover and actualize his truest being, is a compelling one, but it is also peculiar and Western. It shouldn't serve as a standard for defining and evaluating personhood in general, given these problems. The natural question to ask is whether some other alternative might explain the significance and constructedness of particular selves in a way that the standard philosophical views of personal identity don't even attempt to do. Here, I think a different literary trope suggests itself: the self as a character. Much as the narrative view holds that when we construct our own selves and interpret those of others, we look for more than a pile of qualities. We try to make that nexus of behaviors, habits, commitments, and memories hang together into a comprehensible whole, a coherent texture of being, as Iris Murdoch says. Achieving such coherence of character can be a deep and ongoing challenge, which she calls a great and rare art. Telling stories is one common tool we use to do this, but these stories typically concern short episodes within our lives, not our lives as a whole. Some individuals are fortunate or, conversely, burdened with a sense of coherent self from the outset, while others develop it gradually through introspection. While stories and characters can be instrumental in shaping our understanding of self, they are not essential for selfhood. The reliance on narratives or characters might lead us to question the authenticity of the selves we construct through rationalization. What if our existence is merely a collection of properties that differ from one another in countless trivial ways, yet lack the profound patterns that give selfhood its significance? What if the construction of self is, in some sense, a fiction? I believe this is a valid concern. The reason why traditional views of personal identity fail to explain what makes Alpha unique and me is that there is no profound metaphysical distinction between us, aside from our numerical distinctness and the numerous properties that set us apart. Many of these properties are utterly inconsequential. However, this is not how we experience or can possibly live our lives. We are sense-making creatures, driven to make important decisions, form deep connections with others, and pursue long-term projects. These endeavors necessitate that we determine what we care about, even if our choices hold no significance in the grand scheme of the universe when viewed objectively.